Ghostly tales, yet mirrors of human life. Hey everyone! Welcome to Encountering Chinese, Ghostly Tales from Zhai. Today, I'm going to tell you a story called Miss 14. Fong Sheng, from Guangping County, lived during the reign of Emperor Zhai in the Ming Dynasty. In his youth, Fong Sheng was known for his frivolous behavior and excessive drinking. One day at dawn, Fong Sheng happened to go out and encountered a young girl. She was dressed in a red shawl, with delicate features, accompanied by a little maid. They were treading the muddy path in the early morning, struggling along with their shoes and socks soaked through. Fong Sheng, upon seeing the young girl, secretly developed an admiration for her. In the evening, Fong Sheng, drunk, passed by a long-abandoned temple. A woman emerged from the temple, and to his surprise, it was the same beauty he had encountered earlier. Upon seeing Fong Sheng, she immediately turned and ran back into the temple. Fong Sheng wondered why such a beauty would reside in a temple. He tied his donkey at the entrance and decided to investigate. Inside, he found the temple in ruins, with crumbling walls and moss-covered steps resembling a carpet. As he hesitated, an elderly man with gray hair and tidy attire appeared. He asked Fong Sheng, "Where does the guest come from?" Fong Sheng replied, "I just happened to pass by and intended to explore." "And you, sir, why are you here?" The old man explained, "I am a wanderer with no place to stay, so I temporarily settled here with my family. Since you have honored us with your presence here, please come inside and have a cup of mountain tea, consider it as having a drink." The old man welcomed the guest into the temple. Inside, Fong Sheng noticed a courtyard behind the main hall, with a smooth stone path and no weeds. They entered a room with fragrant curtains and beds. Seated, the old man introduced himself. "My surname is Shin." Suddenly, under the influence of alcohol, Fong Sheng boldly asked the old man, "I heard that you have a daughter who has not yet found a suitable spouse. I do not mean to be presumptuous, but I would like to propose marriage to her." With a smile, old man Shin replied, "Please allow me to discuss with my wife." Before long, a maid whispered something into old man Shin's ear, prompting him to stand up and ask Fong Sheng to wait patiently while he went into the inner room. Muffled voices could be heard from inside, and soon old man Shin hurried back out. Fong Sheng thought there must be good news, but old man Shin sat down and chatted with him without mentioning the matter again. Unable to contain himself, Fong Sheng asked, "I wonder what the young lady's decision is." "I hope you can dispel my doubts," old man Shin replied. "Sir, you are an outstanding individual, and I admire your demeanor. However, there are some things in my heart that I cannot tell you." Despite Fong Sheng's repeated requests, old man Shin said, "I have 19 daughters, 12 of whom are already married. The matters of their marriages are handled by my wife, and I am not involved." Fong Sheng said, "I only admire the young lady who was walking with the little maid this morning, treading on the dew-covered road." Old man Shin remained silent, and the two sat in silence. Suddenly, Fong Sheng heard whispers of intimate conversation from inside the room. He, under the influence of alcohol, opened the curtain and said, "Since we cannot be husband and wife, allow me to take another look at your face to dispel my regrets." The people in the inner room heard the curtain hook move and stood there, looking at Fong Sheng in astonishment. Among them, there was indeed a woman in red, shaking her sleeves and bowing her head, standing there gracefully, playing with her clothes. Seeing Fong Sheng enter, the women in the room were all in a panic. Enraged, old man Shen ordered his servants to drag Fong Sheng out. Increasingly intoxicated, Fong Sheng collapsed into the overgrown weeds and fell asleep. The broken tiles and stones from the roof fell like rain, fortunately missing him. After sleeping for a while, Fong Sheng vaguely heard his donkey grazing by the roadside. He stood up, mounted the donkey, and staggered on toward home. In the dim night, Fong Sheng mistakenly walked into a valley by the creek, where wolves ran and nightingales cried, frightening him so much that his hair stood on end and he shivered all over. He hesitated, trembling, and looked around, unsure of his whereabouts. In the distance, he saw faint lights among the vast woods, estimating that there must be a village there, so he hurried to seek shelter. Upon reaching the village, Fong Sheng saw a tall gate of a household and knocked on it with his whip. Someone inside asked him, "Who are you, arriving here in the middle of the night?" Fong Sheng explained that he had lost his way. The person inside said, "Wait, I'll inform my master." Fong Sheng stood outside, waiting anxiously for a response. Suddenly, he heard the sound of unlocking and opening the door from inside the courtyard. A sturdy servant came out to lead his donkey. Once inside, Fong Sheng saw the luxurious house with lights shining in the hall. Shortly after he sat down, a woman emerged from the inner room and inquired about his name. Fong Sheng truthfully revealed his identity. After a while, several maids assisted an elderly lady out and announced with solemnity, "Madam has arrived." Fong Sheng then stood up, adjusted his clothes, and prepared to pay his respects. But the old lady quickly stopped him, asking him to sit down. She then said to him, "Are you Fong Yunzi's grandson?" Fong Sheng was surprised and replied, "Yes." The old lady smiled and said, "You are my nephew's son. As I am now in my old age, we haven't had any contact between relatives for a long time." Fong Sheng apologized for not visiting her before and asked her to reveal her identity. The old lady replied, "You will know in the future." Fong Sheng dared not ask further and sat across from the old lady, pondering. The old lady asked him, "Grandson, why did you come here so late at night?" Fong Sheng, who had always been boastful of his courage, recounted the scene he had encountered. The old lady smiled and said, "This is a good thing. Besides, you are a talented scholar and will not tarnish this marriage. How could that fox spirit be so arrogant and rude? Don't worry, I will act as the matchmaker for you." Fong Sheng expressed his gratitude repeatedly. The old lady then turned to the people beside her and said, "I didn't expect the daughter of the Shen family to be so beautiful, to attract such affection from my grandson." A maid replied, "They have 19 daughters, all of them elegant and charming. I wonder which one the young master wants to marry." Fong Sheng replied, "The girl is about 15 or 16 years old." The maid said, "That's Miss 14. In March, She came with her mother to wish Madame a happy birthday. Does Madame still remember? The old lady smiled and said, Is it the one who wore shoes with carved lotus patterns on the wooden soles, with incense inside, and walked with a veil? The maid confirmed, Yes, that's her. The old lady said, That girl is particularly clever and coquettish, but indeed graceful and charming. My grandson has a good eye. Then, the old lady instructed the maid to call Miss 14th. After a while, the maid returned and reported, Miss 14 of the Shen family has arrived. Soon, everyone saw a girl in a red dress walking in and bowing to the old lady. The old lady pulled her up and said, From now on, you are my grandson's wife. No need to kneel as a maid. Miss 14 stood up gracefully, her red sleeves hanging down. The old lady tidied her hair and earrings, asking, What have you been doing at home recently? Miss 14 replied timidly, I do some embroidery in my spare time. She glanced back at Fong Sheng, looking shy and uneasy. The old lady said, This is my grandson. He is eager to marry you. Why did you let him get lost and wander in the valley all night? Miss 14 remained silent. The old lady said, I called you here just to consider making a match for my grandson. Miss 14 still kept silent. The old lady ordered the bed to be cleaned and prepared, arranging for them to marry immediately. Miss 14 shyly said, I want to go back and inform my parents. The old lady said, I am making the match for you. Can it be wrong? Miss 14 said, I dare not disobey Madame's order, but I cannot agree to such a hasty marriage. The old lady smiled and said, You, little girl, indeed have aspirations. You are truly the best choice for my grandson's wife. She then plucked a golden flower from Miss 14's head and gave it to Fong Sheng to keep, instructing him to check the almanac and find an auspicious date for the wedding. Then, she sent the maid to escort Miss 14th back home. At that moment, the distant rooster had already crowed, signaling dawn. The old lady sent someone to lead Fong Sheng out and give him his donkey. As Fong Sheng took a few steps away, he suddenly turned back to look. The village houses had all disappeared, replaced only by dense pine forests and several graves hidden beneath overgrown grass. Fong Sheng collected his thoughts and remembered that this place was originally the tomb of Minister Shui. Minister Shui was the younger brother of Fong Sheng's deceased grandmother, which was why the old lady had referred to him as her grandson. Fong Sheng understood that he had encountered ghosts last night, but he still didn't know who Miss 14 was. He sighed and returned home, casually picking an auspicious day and waiting for it to arrive. However, he still worried that the engagement with the ghost might not hold. He visited the abandoned temple again, finding it still desolate. Upon inquiring with the locals, he learned that foxes often appeared in the temple. Fong Sheng thought to himself, Even if I marry Miss 14, it wouldn't be too bad if she turned out to be a fox. On the day of the wedding, Fong Sheng cleaned the house and the roads meticulously, and he sent servants to wait for Miss 14's arrival. However, as midnight approached without any news, Fong Sheng felt hopeless. Yet, before long, he heard commotion outside the door. Quickly slipping on his shoes, Fong Sheng went outside and saw the bridal sedan chair had already stopped in the courtyard. The maids had helped Miss 14 inside and seated her. There were no extra dowry items, only two burly servants who carried a large urn-like money jar and placed it in the corner of the main hall. Fong Sheng was delighted to have such a beautiful bride and didn't mind whether Miss 14 was human or not. He asked her, "My grandmother is just a ghost. Why does your family obey her so obediently?" Miss 14 replied, "Her husband, Minister Shui, serves as the chief inspector of the 5 departments in the underworld. The ghosts and foxes within hundreds of miles around here are his subordinates, but he seldom returns home." Fong Sheng did not forget about the matchmaker and visited Minister Shui's tomb the next day to pay his respects. Upon returning home, Fong Sheng saw 2 maids bringing embroidered silk with shell patterns as a congratulatory gift. After placing the silk on the table, they left. Fong Sheng informed Miss 14, who upon seeing the silk, said, "This belongs to Minister Shui's family." In this county, there was a court secretary surnamed Chu, who served as the intermediary between the emperor and his ministers in written communication. His son, Chu, had been classmates with Fong Sheng when they were young, and they had a close relationship. Upon hearing that Fong Sheng had married a fox wife, Chu sent food and wine to their wedding 3 days later, and then visited Fong Sheng's home to congratulate him. A few days later, Chu sent a note inviting Fong Sheng to drink with him. Upon hearing this, Miss 14 warned Fong Sheng, saying, "A few days ago when Chu visited, I peeked at him through the crack in the wall and found that his eyes resembled those of a monkey, and his nose was like that of a hawk, his appearance sinister. You should not have too much contact with him, and it's best not to go this time." Fong Sheng agreed. The next day, Chu came to Fong Sheng's home to reprimand him for breaking the appointment, bringing along his new literary works. When Fong Sheng made some mocking comments about these poems, Chu felt ashamed, and the two eventually parted ways unhappily. After returning to his room, Fong Sheng laughed as he recounted the incident to Miss 14. Miss 14 looked miserable and said, "Chu is as cruel as a jackal, you should not get too close to him. But you didn't listen to my advice and offended him, which will bring disaster." Fong Sheng smiled and expressed his gratitude. Later, whenever Fong Sheng encountered Chu, he always flattered him, and the previous grievances between them gradually disappeared. At the time when the governor of education was overseeing the examination, Chu took first place, while Fong Sheng took second. Chu was elated and sent someone to invite Fong Sheng for a drink. Fong Sheng initially declined but eventually agreed after being invited multiple times. Upon arrival, he discovered that it was Chu's birthday, and the guests were plentiful, with a sumptuous feast laid out. Chu showed Fong Sheng his exam paper, and relatives and friends gathered around to admire and praise it. After several rounds of drinks, music began to play in the hall, and everyone was in high spirits. Suddenly, Chu said to Fong Sheng, "There's a saying. In the examination hall, one should consider the preferences of the examiners. Now I know that this saying is completely wrong. My ranking ahead of you is not because my essay was better, but because the first few sentences of my essay showed true insight." Chu's words were met with applause and praise from the guests. Due to being drunk, Fong Sheng couldn't help but burst into laughter and said, Do you still think you got the first place because your essay was good? It's because the examiners wanted to bribe your father. Fong Sheng's words caused the guests to change their expressions, and Chu, feeling ashamed and resentful, was speechless with anger. Subsequently, the guests gradually dispersed, and Fong Sheng made his escape. Fong Sheng, upon sobering up, regretted his words and confided in Miss 14. Miss 14 angrily said, "You are truly an ignorant and frivolous young man. Treating a gentleman with such frivolity will lead to the loss of one's virtue. Using such an attitude towards villains will bring disaster upon oneself. You are on the brink of calamity. I cannot bear to see you fall into ruin. Please let me bid you farewell now." Fong Sheng, filled with fear, shed tears and expressed his remorse to Miss 14. Miss 14 said, "If you want me to stay, then listen to me. From today onwards, you must stay indoors, avoid making friends, and especially refrain from drinking." Fong Sheng respectfully agreed to her instructions. Miss 14 managed the household diligently and efficiently, spending her days spinning and weaving at home. She often visited her parents' home but never stayed overnight. Additionally, she would occasionally use some silver to sustain their livelihood, and any surplus money would be deposited into a large money jar. Miss 14 also kept the doors closed all day, instructing the servants to turn away any visitors who came. One day, a messenger sent by Chu arrived with a letter for Miss 14. Upon seeing it, she immediately burned the letter without informing Fong Sheng. The next day, Fong Sheng went out to the city to attend a funeral, where he unexpectedly encountered Chu. Chu grabbed his arm and persistently invited him. Fong Sheng tried to decline, but Chu insisted, even having a stable boy bring Fong Sheng's horse and forcibly leading him to Chu's residence. Upon arrival, Chu immediately instructed servants to lay out a sumptuous feast. Fong Sheng continued to excuse himself, claiming he needed to return home early. However, Chu kept obstructing him and even had a maid come out to play music. Fong Sheng, who had always been unrestrained, felt extremely bored lately due to being confined at home. Now, suddenly presented with an opportunity for heavy drinking, he became excited and no longer paid attention to the warnings of Miss 14. Subsequently, he drank heavily and collapsed at the table. Chu's wife, Ruan, was particularly fierce and jealous, causing the maids and concubines in the household to avoid adorning themselves for fear of her wrath. The previous day, one maid accidentally entered the study and was caught by Ruan, who proceeded to beat her head with a wooden staff. The maid's skull was fractured, and she died on the spot. Chu, harboring resentment from Fong Sheng's previous mockery, harbored a grudge and sought revenge daily. He plotted to intoxicate Fong Sheng with alcohol and frame him. Seizing the opportunity while Fong Sheng was unconscious from intoxication, Chu carried the maid's body into Fong Sheng's room and then left, locking the door behind him. At around 5 in the morning, Fong Sheng woke up, only to find himself lying next to the table. As he searched for his bed and pillow, he felt something soft entangling his feet. Upon investigation, he found it was a person. Thinking it was a servant sent by the host to attend to him, he tried to kick the person with his foot. However, the person remained motionless, with a stiff body. Horrified, Fong Sheng ran out of the room screaming. The servants rushed in and, upon seeing the body, immediately apprehended Fong Sheng, angrily accusing him. Chu emerged to examine the body, falsely accusing Fong Sheng of raping and murdering his maid. Fong Sheng was then taken into custody and escorted to the county office in Guangping County. A day later, Miss 14 received the news. Tears streaming down her face, she said, "I knew this day would come." Thereafter, she sent money to Fong Sheng regularly. Fong Sheng, upon meeting with the magistrate, was unable to defend himself and endured multiple beatings, leaving his skin torn and bleeding. Miss 14 personally visited Fong Sheng. When they met, Fong Sheng was overwhelmed with grief and unable to speak. Realizing the difficulty of resolving the wrongful case, Miss 14 advised Fong Sheng to confess to avoid further punishment. Tearfully, Fong Sheng agreed to obey. Miss 14 moved between her home and the prison, though others nearby couldn't see her. Upon returning home, she sighed with regret and dismissed the maid. Living alone for several days, Miss 14 sought out a matchmaker and purchased a maiden named Luer. Luer, of marriageable age and with a beautiful appearance, shared lodging and meals with Miss 14, who cared for her more than any other servant. Fong Sheng eventually confessed to the accidental killing of the maid while intoxicated and was sentenced to death by hanging. The servants tearfully informed Miss 14 of the verdict, but she appeared calm and unaffected. As the autumn day of execution approached, Miss 14 became increasingly anxious. She busied herself with her husband's affairs, coming and going tirelessly, her footsteps never ceasing. In moments of solitude, she would sob bitterly, her grief palpable, resulting in a significant decline in sleep and appetite. One afternoon, around 4 o'clock, a fox servant girl who had been sent out previously suddenly rushed back. Miss 14 immediately rose to her feet and took her to a private room to talk. When they came out, Miss 14 had a smile on her face and went about her household chores as usual. The next day, servants went to the prison, and Fong Sheng sent a message asking Miss 14 to come and bid him a final farewell. When the servants returned and delivered the message, Miss 14 responded casually, showing no signs of grief or sorrow, seemingly indifferent to the matter. Her family members whispered amongst themselves about her resolute demeanor. Suddenly, there was a buzz on the streets, spreading rumors that the court secretary Chu had been dismissed from his post, and the imperial observer had been sent by the emperor to handle Fong Sheng's case. The servants rejoiced upon hearing this news and informed Miss 14. She was also delighted and immediately sent someone to the government office to inquire about Fong Sheng's situation. To their surprise, Fong Sheng had already been released from prison, and there was a mixture of joy and sorrow as master and servant were reunited. Shortly after, the authorities captured Chu, and upon interrogation, the truth of the matter was revealed. Fong Sheng was officially declared innocent. When Fong Sheng returned home and saw Miss 14, he burst into tears, while she showed a sorrowful expression. After they had shared their grief, they also found happiness in their reunion. However, Fong Sheng remained unaware of how his case had come to the emperor's attention. Miss 14 smiled and pointed to the servant girl, saying, "She is your benefactor." Fong Sheng was astonished and asked for an explanation. It turned out that earlier, Miss 14 had sent the servant girl to the capital with the intention of pleading Fong Sheng's case directly to the emperor. However, upon arrival, the servant girl found that the palace was guarded by divine forces, preventing her from entering. After several months of fruitless attempts, she was about to return home to reconsider her plan when she heard that the emperor was planning to travel to Datong. Seizing the opportunity, she went to Datong in advance and disguised herself as a destitute prostitute. When the emperor visited the brothel, he was immediately captivated by her. Sensing that she was not an ordinary woman, the emperor asked about her grievances. The servant girl tearfully recounted her story, claiming to be Fong Sheng's daughter, sold into the brothel due to his wrongful conviction. Touched by her plight, the emperor generously compensated her with 100 gold coins. Before leaving, he inquired in detail about Fong Sheng's case and made a note of his name. The emperor expressed his desire to take the servant girl back to the palace with him, but she only wished for her father and daughter to be reunited, rejecting his offer of luxury. The emperor agreed and departed. The servant girl recounted the entire ordeal to Fong Sheng, who immediately bowed down in gratitude, tears of appreciation streaming down his face. After some time had passed, Miss 14 suddenly said to Fong Sheng, "If it weren't for our marital bond, I wouldn't have encountered such troubles. When you were arrested, I pleaded on your behalf with our relatives, but no one helped me find a solution. The bitterness I felt at that time was truly incomprehensible. Now, the more I see of the human world, the more weary and sorrowful I become. I have found a better wife for you, and we can part ways from now on." Upon hearing this, Fong Sheng burst into tears, fell to the ground, and begged Miss 14 not to leave. That night, Miss 14 sent Luer to accompany Fong Sheng, but he refused to accept her. The next morning, Fong Sheng saw that Miss 14's appearance had changed dramatically. Over the following month, she gradually showed signs of aging, and 6 months later, her complexion darkened, resembling that of an old country woman. However, Fong Sheng continued to respect her and remained faithful. Then, suddenly, she bid farewell again, saying, "You have a suitable companion, why do you need this ugly old wife like me?" Fong Sheng wept bitterly, but still treated her with the same love as before. Another month passed, and Miss 14 fell ill, refusing to eat or drink, lying weakly in her room. Fong Sheng cared for her, administering medicines as if she were his own parent. However, neither witchcraft nor medicine proved effective, and Miss 14 eventually passed away. Overwhelmed with grief, Fong Sheng used the money bestowed by the emperor for the servant girl to arrange a grand funeral for Miss 14. After a few days, the fox servant girl also departed, and in accordance with Miss 14's arrangement, Fong Sheng married Luer. A year later, Luer gave birth to a son. However, the Fong family's farmland suffered from consecutive poor harvests, and their financial situation worsened day by day. The couple found themselves in constant worry, unable to find a way out of their predicament. They suddenly remembered the large money jar in the corner of the hall, where Fong Sheng used to see Miss 14 put money in. Unsure if it was still there, the two approached and upon closer inspection, found the place filled with jars and pots of soy sauce and salt. They moved each of these items aside one by one, but when they tried to insert chopsticks into the large money jar, they found it too hard to penetrate. They smashed the jar, and money spilled onto the floor. From then on, the Fong family became prosperous again. Later, an old servant from the Fong family happened to visit Mount Taihua and saw Miss 14 riding on a mule, with the fox servant girl following on a donkey. Miss 14 asked the old servant, "Is Mr. Fong still well?" Then she said, "Please tell your master that I have ascended to the ranks of immortals." With that, Miss 14 disappeared. In the end, the author added a commentary. He said, "Frivolous words often come from scholars, which is truly regrettable. I myself have taken risks by expressing untimely remarks, but I have never stopped striving to align myself with the ways of the noble. Whether it brings calamity or blessings, it doesn't matter." If Fong Sheng nearly lost his life because of a single sentence, and if it weren't for the intervention of a celestial being, how could he have escaped imprisonment and returned to the mortal world? A single word can lead to such great upheaval, which is truly worrisome. Alright. That's all for today's ghostly tale. Miss 14. If you enjoyed it, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. Please also encourage everyone to comment and share more. We'll see you in the next episode.